This week, Paul and I discussed the one language to rule them all. Yes, JavaScript. In the news, Beep for local privilege escalation, developers leverage third-party libraries instead of built-in functionality, and Intel admits a load of its CPUs have a Spectre variant that can't be fixed. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library, on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30.
Welcome everyone to episode 11, our 12th episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlett, and I'm excited to be joined by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
What's going on, Keith? Always excited to do the still kind of shiny new Application Security Weekly. I'm excited with the way it's been going and the stories we're talking about and the response from the audience. So this is a wonderful welcome addition to my Friday mornings.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun so far, and quite frankly, the news this week has been really exciting. As you could probably hear, I've got a new audio setup. Thank you to Apollo Clark for sending over some suggestions on how to get this all set up. And
what is that? What is that microphone?
This is an Audio-Technica USB 2020,
or
something like that.
I've heard of those before. Yeah, it's pretty good. You sound pretty good. So,
thank you. Yeah, it's much better than the Blue Yeti that I bought. So, needless to say, this thing is a major upgrade.
Nice.
So, many thanks to Apollo Clark for that. It is hopefully going to make the rest of our audience enjoyment that much better. So, a couple of quick announcements, Paul, that I want to cover at least in this segment. Is first, go to itpro.tv/securityweekly and use the code SECWeekly30 to try a free 7-day trial and receive 30% off your monthly membership for the lifetime of your active subscription. So to that end, I've definitely been checking it out for some of the development stuff that they're adding. Paul, I know that you've probably jumped on there a bunch of times for some different things. Any recent stuff that you're watching over at IT Pro TV?
Not currently, although some of my projects will probably forced me to go watch some of those training videos. My current project, and while security related, I actually have a almost like non-security use case, but I'm going to take advantage of the security aspects of it. So I've been playing around with OSSec, and I put one agent on one Windows box here in the studio, and I've got that now successfully. I actually checked the logs this morning. They are successfully reporting to the security onion, which runs OSSec, that allows you to use the Elk stack with Kibana as your front end. I search for that IP address, and I can actually see Windows events. Now, I have to tune it a little more because my goal is to, inherently it lets me look at primarily like Windows logon success and failures, which I thought was pretty cool from a security perspective. Also, I want to tune it so that I want to try and see if it's possible to configure OSSec to pull CPU utilization, memory utilization,
right,
and CPU temperature, because that one system's been giving us issues. And then if that works, I want to roll it out to the rest of the production systems, not only monitoring for security, but also monitoring for some of the environmental factors that tend to be an issue, especially as the warmer months are coming, not soon enough.
Yeah, right. I mean, I see you're wearing a hat. I almost always wear a hat on this show, so it's no surprise there. But yeah, it has definitely been cold up here in the Northeast, unseasonably cold in my experience. Hopefully by the time May comes around, it'll be warm, because we also have Source Boston coming up May 9th through the 10th. Go to sourceconference.com and register using the code
you weren't
SW75.
on the show last night. We interviewed Masha Sadova, and I was thinking about it last night after a couple of glasses of bourbon. I think I said her name is Masha Sedona in the later segment, and I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't right. So, but she was awesome. She came on the show last night, as well as Catherine Tytler from Misty. So it was a good show. Last time we talked about InfoSec World and interviewed a Source Boston keynote speaker. Masha's given the Thursday morning keynote at Source Boston this year. So not to be missed. Awesome. She was an awesome speaker. Very smart, very energetic. So yeah, I can see why Rob had selected her for giving the keynote. So if you're not going to Source Boston, you should and enjoy some of those activities, including some awesome keynotes. So.
And we have a $75 off discount code. It's Security Weekly 75 Whiskey Mike Kilo Whiskey. So SW75 WMKW. Definitely go check it out. I'm going to be there, Paul. I imagine you guys are going to be there as well.
We will. Yeah, we'll be in the vendor area. I'll be giving a talk, which just got, did I tell you this got really interesting? We had a security event on one of our Docker instances in the cloud.
Really?
Yeah. And actually, I've never done forensics in this capacity, and I haven't delved into it. And so I'm talking about open source technologies for security monitoring, which obviously I haven't implemented because we had a security event. We basically ripped down some infrastructure, saved everything off, and like rebuilt the infrastructure, and are very heavily IP filtering now. So, but the existing infrastructure, I'm excited because our sponsor, Layered Insight, is going to help us not only configure their tool, which is a day late and $1 short, and that's totally my fault, but also I'm hoping for some help in the forensics aspect, as that's what they do is, container security. So I'm hoping to rely on their expertise. In talking with them, I believe they have done some forensic investigations in this capacity, and I think that's going to make awesome content for both the shows and my talk. So I'm always, everyone's like, we had a security incident. Like, I think they expect him to be upset. Like, I'm excited. I'm like, that's awesome. It gives us stuff to talk about. And of course, no one's data, no one's data was harmed. And we did, pull the infrastructure down, rekey everything, redo everything, and apply additional security controls. And we're working on the investigation. And we're always very transparent with our listeners. Anytime we have a security event, we talk about it on the show, because no one is spared from security events. And we don't want to be like Panera and just deny it, because that's bad.
That's a whole other story that I actually actively tried to avoid this week, because it's such a train wreck. But maybe we'll talk about it in the news segment. So far, though, I definitely wanted to talk about the one language to rule them all, which in this case, some people are going to argue, they're going to be like, no, it's straight C or bust. But arguably, Node.js, which is effectively, as some people would think of it from a programming standpoint, kind of like an interpreter for JavaScript on the server and a number of other things, allows for this JavaScript ecosystem to go well beyond the ideas of, hey, you're building a website, throw some JavaScript up on the front end and it looks pretty and it actually interacts very nicely. It has got to the point now with Node that effectively everything that you would want to build, anywhere you want to build it, can be built today in JavaScript. That's not to say that that's the best tool for the job.
Yeah, that's not to say you should. It certainly
is a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Right. But believe it or not, though, a lot of things have been built with JavaScript today that some people don't even really realize has been built with JavaScript. So I wanted to just cover a couple of the domains that Node.js has successfully allowed for JavaScript to take over, some more efficiently or effectively than others. And so hopefully throughout that, Paul, you'll have some insights. Obviously, the web is kind of the first place where JavaScript has really taken over. React, Angular, Vue, anything else that's a front-end JavaScript framework has just taken off in the last few years.
Keith, I want to make the distinction from both a security perspective and application development perspective that you don't have to be 100% Node.js and using these technologies. You can from what I've observed, kind of like add them on to your project. So if your backend is in Java or your backend in Python, like we have with Flask in your project and my project respectively, you can like go add a Node.js component to that and have that handle the front end user interaction, correct? Or the backend. I mean, either one.
Yeah.
But I think you can pretty easily add that on to your existing projects, correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, a lot of organizations today are using it for front end development. So to the extent that a good example is with Flask and Vue. I've seen a number of different kind of guides and walkthroughs on using Vue.js, which is all of your front end management of the single page application effect that you get. Then run on the back end for all of the logic, all of the password hashing and checking, etc. in Python Flask. So you can take frameworks from React to Angular to Vue and stick them right onto the front end to whatever you're already using today, right? You don't have to use, Python. Like, for example, really good example here. The InfoSec Mentors project is almost entirely just Python Flask. And I really, really should be touching up the front end because it's very simple right now. And it could use a makeover in probably Vue.js, which is what I'll end up using.
And that's kind of my assessment too, Keith, is the front end capacity that Python Flask gives you is somewhat limiting. And adding on these other JavaScript frameworks is probably the way to go. And we probably need to do that for both of our respective applications. So.
And I would actually, it's funny because I've played with React, I've played with AngularJS and Angular 2, as well as Vue.js, which is kind of like the new kid on the block. And I got to say, writing Vue.js has been simple and elegant. My own website, attackdriven.io, which is somewhat simple right now. It's kind of like a resume site, for lack of a better term, is all written in Vue.js, and it uses an Nginx backend for the web server. So I loved it because it was both mobile friendly and desktop friendly from a development standpoint. Again, props to Apollo Clark for saying, make sure you can fit it inside a bag first, i.e. build mobile first, and then expand it to desktop, because it's hard to shrink things as opposed to expand them from a display and a user interaction standpoint. So I personally love Vue.js. If you're looking at new development frameworks for the front end, Vue is really easy and fun to develop in. And IT Pro TV has an entire course in it, so go check that out as well.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, I want to ask you, Keith, about the Node operating system. How does that work?
That's something that I thought was pretty crazy, and I just stumbled upon myself. It actually is using the Linux kernel to do some of the more efficient, underlying calls to the hardware, but it's all otherwise run on the Node runtime. So there's no bash actually involved in the operating system itself.
That's so weird.
Now it's a matter of
weird.
Yeah, I know, right? It's crazy that
I kind of had the same feeling when I dabbled very, very short time frame with CoreOS, right, for running containers, and it was like not Linux enough for me. And I was like, wow, it's way too much of a learning curve. And now you see this NodeOS, and there is no shell, essentially, like no bash there. Which I think we're going to start seeing trends, moving towards those leaner, purpose-built operating systems. I don't think they'll be completely ubiquitous, but in application development, I think we're going to start seeing this as a trend emerge in the next year or so.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, Solomon Hike, who's the founder and former CEO, I think he recently departed Docker, recently was sharing a talk where someone was doing like a Linux kit work with containers, where they were effectively building the entire operating system on the fly using containers. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I think there's like CubeOS or Cubes or something like that, that does similar kind of like containerized operating system functionality for like different applications that you install. And from my understanding, NodeOS is somewhat the same, except that in this case, the package manager is actually NPM as opposed to, apt, as you might get on like a Ubuntu system, for example. So I thought that was just crazy. But also, I remember a few years ago, I was speaking with a student at University of New Hampshire who was talking about some theoretical work that was being done on optimization of operating systems. And it was theorized, it hadn't actually been proven out at the time, but it was theorized that an application, or rather I should say an operating system written entirely in JavaScript would actually be 2 or 3% more efficient in terms of compute speed, time, system
Hmm.
utilization than modern operating systems, which kind of blew my mind. And I was like, yeah, no, never going to happen. At the time, Node really wasn't as mature as I think it is today, and it's only a few years on. But to that end, it was kind of like, yeah, never going to happen. And now I'm looking at NodeOS, and I'm like, maybe it is happening. Like maybe like the world is just changing under my feet, and I don't even know it yet.
Yeah, and I think
So
that
yeah,
as from an attacker standpoint, your landscape is changing now, and it's best to try and stay ahead of that because your traditional attacks, such as command execution, are going to have to completely change. Like, and certainly your payloads, but also some of the attacks you might perform just don't even apply because there's no traditional operating system underneath the covers. I think we've already started to see that with Docker. Of course, we've observed that some of the attacks have morphed and changed into something completely new, and I'm anxious to report on that, certainly. But as an attacker, you should be paying attention to these technologies and adjusting your toolkits, which is exciting. I think we're going to see a whole new slew of attack methodologies and attack tools, which is awesome.
yeah, and to that end as well, what's interesting though is you run into problems with the way that Node was built that lead to also all sorts of other security issues that I imagine will start popping out. For example, I think it was about a year ago, maybe closer to 8 months ago, there was a news article that showed that Node was taking 64-bit float numbers and packaging them or compressing them down into 53-bit. So from a compression and optimization standpoint, maybe good, but from a precision standpoint, really bad. And when you start thinking about encryption, for example, right? Precision is somewhat important, but also to the extent that it has to be optimized to use as many bits as possible for optimal encryption to take place. Truncating things in that way is just all bad. And so I think that you're right, Paul. Definitely the attack vectors are going to change, but at the same time, I think what's going to start happening now is people are going to start taking a deeper look at Node as an ecosystem and realizing that, for example, on the desktop, if you're running Slack today, you're running Node in the background to actually run Slack because it's written with Electron, which is all running on Node. So if you suddenly have a Node server, and I think actually you covered this on Security Weekly.
We did. There was
close to about a year ago.
Moses, SANS instructor that presented on attacking client-side Node applications. Yeah.
Moses Hernandez is who we're referring to there specifically. So that was an excellent episode. I don't recall the number that it was, but it definitely was a eye-opening episode because, if you're running a whole lot of different applications today, you actually end up running them in Node to some degree or another. So to that end, Node is somewhat taken over the desktop, right? Like suddenly you write an application in Electron, which was developed by GitHub, and you can run it on Mac, Linux, or Windows natively, right? You don't have to worry about
it's the new Java.
Right? Well, it's the new Java, but it's also, in my opinion, faster and more lightweight. Like you look at
you don't want to run Java on the client. We established that in like 1999. So
over 3 billion devices are running Java, Paul.
Right? Yeah.
Like heaven help us. But to that end, like if you're running VS Code, for example, VS Code is Electron based. So I don't know, personally, like I've run with PyCharm, WebStorm, I've run on Atom and others, and I found that VS Code is snappy and it's lightweight and powerful, right? Like it can do a lot on very few resources. And so to that end, the efficiency game is, win right there. But it's amazing to me to think that so much is coming back to a language that was written in 10 days. JavaScript, the first ECMAScript, as it was actually called, they used the term or the name or moniker of JavaScript to ride the coattails of Java during the .com boom. And so it's actually like the real name for JavaScript is actually ECMAScript. And I think we're up to number 6 or 7 at this point. But sometimes you'll hear it as like ES6 or ES7 as the abbreviation, and everyone else just calls it JavaScript because that was the moniker that they were using. It's also taken over the mobile space though, Paul. Like, so React, we were talking about a little bit earlier from the desktop environment, just take it on top of whatever you're running on the back end and you're good to go. You can actually write mobile cross-platform applications using React Native, which gives you compilable applications to run on your iOS or Android device. which also kind of blows my mind because JavaScript on the phone, like, sure, you're running in your browser, okay, but as an actual native application, I don't know, Paul. What do you think about that? That's you've seen just as I have, but you've seen the rise of mobile devices and played in a lot of different sandboxes when it comes to iOS or Android. What are your thoughts there?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
At least he's honest.
I think it's just too much stuff going on my laptop. So, what was the question?
It's okay.
Sorry.
So, JavaScript as compilable applications on mobile devices. So you've run, I think you're on a Google Pixel at this point, if I've been following along on the shows correctly. But you've also used iOS devices. I find it kind of mind blowing that you can write an entire application for two different operating systems for the mobile environment and have it run just seamlessly. That kind of blows my mind, especially given how disparate or how problematic the Google ecosystem has been for security purposes. And yet those applications are able to make it into the iOS kind of walled garden without issue. Maybe writing in React Native is a more secure approach. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was just kind of mulling in my brain. Like, I know that an Android, for example, is really easy to hijack packages and execute code. Hence, there's always a news story every week about some malicious Android app. To the point where I stopped covering it because it's just not even news anymore. One could hope that JavaScript provides a better framework for developing more secure mobile applications, but it very likely could be that attackers just haven't taken notice because it's not as ubiquitous as native Android apps or native iOS apps. So, yeah, I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those situations where the future attack surface is probably also going to be both related to JavaScript applications, but also leveraging JavaScript as the attack surface. Monero is, as far as I understand, for the mining tool that goes onto your website is JavaScript based. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you're making system level calls with JavaScript kind of scares me a little bit. It
does.
A lot, actually, quite frankly. But that's the world we live in. And speaking of earlier, we talked about backend servers. The whole idea of Node, or the whole purpose of Node, was actually to be able to run JavaScript on the backend. So there is a number of different ways to do this. Express.js is kind of the big one. But you can run a JavaScript application as full stack. I mean, you can run it presentation layer all the way down to the actual web server at this point, which, I don't know, Paul, did you ever think, especially for both you and I going through the .com boom and bust, that we would ever see JavaScript running back end, let alone as much of the front end as it is?
Yeah, it certainly shocked me how much JavaScript has grown over the years. And I hate coding in JavaScript. I guess I got to get over that.
So, honestly, I think that the reason that it's probably so popular is because so many people come from tightly managed languages. Even C or C++ will you do certain things that maybe you shouldn't be doing, but you still have to follow some sort of form, or you have to write it in such a way that the compiler will let you compile, right? And JavaScript is the Wild West of languages. You can do all sorts of crazy things that you probably shouldn't be able to do if it were any other language. And I think that's quite frankly why it has so quickly taken over the ecosystem landscapes of mobile, backend, front end, desktop, and including gaming. You can actually use, it's apparently going out of support at this point, but you can actually use JavaScript to write actual 3D rendering with something called Unity script that was released by the folks that do Unity 3D. So it's even taking over the gaming realm at this point, which to my mind is okay, if it takes off in gaming, it's over, right? If it's running video games front to back, it's done because they've consumed everything at that point from a marketing standpoint.
I just think it's too much like PHP or Perl in your description for my liking, but
Well, we've seen what happened to PHP and Perl, so who knows? Maybe this will be the moth to the flame, right? It will burn brightly for a few years, and then it will just totally burn the building down.
Yeah.
It remains to be seen. I think that with especially with the backing of people like GitHub and other organizations that are doing a lot to make JavaScript better. And quite frankly, some of the improvements that you see in ECMAScript 6 with the way that they're making JavaScript a little bit more like Java from the way that it actually is written, classes and things of that nature. It might make it more consumable in general. And as adoption kind of coalesces around JavaScript, it could be a good thing. Ultimately, if it gets more security eyes on it in terms of hardening and making sure that they're doing proper things with encryption, etc., it could be a good thing. In my mind, if we were to actually unify on one language that does everything sufficiently, might not be a bad idea from a longevity standpoint, right? Like at some point, of course, people will come up with crazy JavaScript frameworks to do new things, as is the problem that we face today. There's a new front end framework that seems to come out every single day,
right?
But adoption seems to be coalescing around really three: Angular, React, and Vue. So I know we have just a couple more minutes for this segment. I actually wanted to cover just a few learning and tools this week, not as many as last week, unfortunately. The first one I'll actually go to, though, is number 3. It's called Gron, which, Paul, if you've ever, have you read Lord of the Rings?
No, I have not.
So being the nerd that I am, to go along with the show,
don't pull my nerd card. Don't pull my nerd card.
Gron is the name of the battering ram that is used on the city of Gondor during the siege of Gondor. It's the giant wolf's head. It's actually displayed in Return of the King, I think, is the movie that it's in. So, but the actual project Gron, number 3 under Learning and Tools, is allowing you to make JSON objects or JavaScript object notation greppable, which for you, Paul, using grep and awk and set, I'm sure, yes, is going to make those people's lives easier that everything seems to be output to JSON and let somebody else handle it. This will actually now make it greppable, which is good because searching through JSON is just kind of a nightmare right now. So I wanted to call that out. The other one, and speaking of attack vectors through JavaScript, is Pwned Jas, which is a browser exploitation library, which is number 2 under Learning Tools. So for those on the red team or on the attacker side, this is a way that you can actually package in CVE named vulnerabilities and exploits against the browser effectively. So now you can get someone to click on a malicious payload, it browses to a site, and then in effect allows you to leverage JavaScript to then exploit that device or exploit that vulnerability using JavaScript, which, I mean, we were talking about attack vectors in JavaScript. Here it is. It's one of those situations where it's now coming to life.
It reminded me of that site that I can't think of the URL, but it allows you to break out of like kiosk restrictions. So like if you're on a pen test and you found a kiosk and it was, locked down so that you couldn't, open up cmd.exe or really do anything, you could, if you get to a browser, you go to this site and it would essentially provide you with multiple techniques to get around the kiosk. That's kind of what this reminded me of.
Yeah, similar. And the other thing that I would call it similar to, perhaps not the same as, but similar to, is the idea of Metasploit, right? So having a framework through which you can actually add in exploitable code to then, exploit vulnerabilities. This is the same sort of idea, right? It's a framework around allowing you to leverage the browser as a point of contact that then turns JavaScript into the exploit. So same as what you have with Metasploit, where you take a Ruby package, you can then write out how the exploit should take place. And then Metasploit is kind of like the delivery mechanism, packages it all up and allows you to push it out. So same idea.
I like the subdomain discovery tool. We're actually talking about that this week on the network. And Carlos Perez did DNS enum a while back, and I didn't get a chance to see if he's been maintaining that. I know a lot of his code, I think, was also included in Metasploit, I want to say.
Yeah, I believe so too.
And this is a new tool for subdomain discovery. What's interesting is one of our sponsors, Domain Tools, has similar functionality, but they partner with a company that has sensors all around the internet that are logging all of the lookups, and Domain Tools has access to that. So from a passive DNS perspective, you can log into Domain Tools, and they will tell you about all of the observed, subdomain lookups, which I thought was really, really cool. And
Yeah,
like an awesome way of doing that, right? You don't have to brute force it, or hope that domain zone transfers are enabled, which usually they aren't today, although some people still do mess up in their configuration. So brute forcing is one method. I kind of like the passive approach. I think that's pretty cool.
And the passive approach is generally better for the defenders. In this case, Amass, which is the tool that we're talking about, number one under learning and tools, is similar to a tool called Sublister. And the idea is to do subdomain discovery. So people like myself or researchers that work on BugCrowd, what we do is we will end up saying, okay, this is an open scope program. Let's see what we can find from certificate authority registration, Bing, Baidu, Google Cache, etc., just to see what's out there. And then from there, you use other tools like Eyewitness and so forth to see what's actually alive at that point, which is a little bit different. But yeah, the passive discovery is a lot better because then you can actually say, yeah, no, that someone was looking it up, but it doesn't actually return anything, so therefore I don't have to bother with it, right? It's
because it can see the responses and determine whether it was actually associated with an IP address or not.
Right. Whereas these tools, they basically say, at one point this existed, but I don't know whether it's alive or not. You have to go to step 2 of testing all of them. Which the last one is an automation testing idea or concept. So Adam Reiser, I might be mispronouncing his name, was also speaking at Hackfest Canada last year, actually at the same time that I was. So I didn't get to see his talk in person, but it's using Selenium to actually automate some of your attack methodologies against different websites or web applications. So I linked to that under number 4 for learning and tools because I thought his talk was excellent, and I highly recommend people check it out. So with that, we will take a break. We will take a break and come back for the news.